Okay. All right. Welcome to yet another episode of 9 p.m. Conversations with Lokesh. We would today be talking about Mahabharat, and the question that we start with is that Mahabharat is often referred to as Dharma Yuddha, and the question really is, what is so dharm about the Battle of Mahabharat? If you look at it at a surface level, at least, it seems like a battle between cousins over property, something that every family has. So, welcome, Lokesh, and let's get started with what's your take on it. I know that this is one question that has intrigued you for a long time.
Thanks, Prashant. So I think so. Mahabharat is an epic that we have all grown up with, and especially our generation because it got broadcast on television and it was like a staple Sunday 9 to 10 for a lot of us. And as an epic, it is an epic which probably a lot of people think is closer to the kind of emotions and the human drama that we go through. The
Mm-hmm.
question at least that has interested me is the question that you posed. So what is the dharma yuddha? So we all know
Mm-hmm.
that in the Mahabharata the great war happens, the 18-day war at the end of it, in which huge amount of destruction happens, cousins fight each other and relatives kill relatives, and there is a huge amount of casualty and loss and destruction. And at the surface, as you said, it looks like a war between cousins. It's a war over succession,
Cousins.
it's a war over property, it's a war about who will get to rule Hastinapur. So if it is as simple as that, and we have seen that happen so many times in history, why is it referred to as dharma yuddha?
Mm-hmm.
Dharma in popular, so not in the correct way of looking at it, kind of connotes righteousness and the right way of doing things. So what is the concept here? Yes, there are injustices, there are wrong things that are committed, and Duryodhan is cast in that evil corner, especially
Mm-hmm.
after the really wrong treatment with Draupadi and the bad behaviors and those kind of things, and the kind of mentions of say Varnavat, where they try to burn down the Pandavas, or the Dyut Krida, where they used false wrong
Mm-hmm.
methods to actually win over the kingdom and all that. But is
Mm-hmm.
that the core message, that this is the evil and evil needs to be finished? So which is like Ramayana is the story of victory of good over evil. That's the common message.
Good over evil. Mm-hmm.
Is this the message here? And the Dharmyut is because Duryodhan is evil, or is it a
Mm-hmm.
Dharmyut because of some other things? Even when at the start of the war, so we have this Gita Updesh at the start of the war, wherein Lord Krishna, as the Sarthi of Arjun,
Mm-hmm.
and Arjun develops doubts at the
Mm-hmm.
start of the battle, and Krishna parks the chariot in the middle of the battlefield and gives the Updesh of the
Mm-hmm.
Gita, wherein he explains that this is your duty, this is your karma, and whether they are your relatives, whether they are your blood relatives, the people you have grown up with. He
Mm-hmm.
sees Bhishma Pitama on the other side, his great grandfather, and he's overcome with emotion. He sees his guru Dronacharya on the other side of the battle, and he needs to battle them, and he knows this is a battle to the death. It's not that they haven't battled before. So
Mm-hmm.
just before this war, they had that
They
war
have
at in Virat, wherein
in Virat
at the end of the
the
exile,
Agyatwas, I think. Yeah.
the Agyatwas, there is this war, and on the other side are exactly the same parties. The Kauravas and the
Mm-hmm.
Pandavas. On the side of the Kauravas are all these warriors.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a war which is not seen in this context. There is no Krishna there trying to say that, okay, you need to do it. In some sense, the message there, at least that I take away, is that that war is a, if I could call it, is a more friendly war. Yes, there is a battle, but it's not a
Mm-hmm.
battle to the death.
Mm-hmm.
The Gita Updesh comes in because here the setup is that this is the final battle. This is a battle
Mm-hmm.
wherein It's not. It will not be decided as to who won it. It will be a battle to the death, and that probably
Fight
creates
to finish,
the
yes.
issues in Arjun's minds, which get addressed, which Lord Krishna tries to answer through Gita. So
Lokesh,
that's the
I have
context.
turned off my camera for a second. Lokesh, I have turned off my camera for a second. I am going to switch to another connection, but I am available here. So you please keep talking.
Okay, it's slightly
Okay.
difficult when the face
Yeah,
goes away to probably
I
adjust
know.
to it.
I I know, but I am available. I'm listening.
Yeah. So we were talking about this. So why is this kind of battle? Why is this like the the finale of the battles, or the grand finale of it? And
Mm-hmm.
why are there these questions? And why is it called the Dharma Yudh? Is a question that is intrigued. At least I have felt very uncomfortable about this question.
Uh huh. Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
this is the background to it, and over a period
Mm-hmm.
of time, it didn't appear that this kind of stemmed from, like we talked about, the contrast with the Ramayana, which seems to be a victory of good over evil, and we celebrate
Good
Dashera
versus
or
evil.
Vijayadashmi as that grand victory of good over evil. That's how we celebrate
Mm-hmm.
Dashera and Vijayadashmi. This
Mm-hmm.
Duryodhan is shown to be scheming, is shown to be grey, but he's not cast in that evil corner. That's at least my reading of the
Mm-hmm.
Mahabharata. Hmm? So
Okay.
then why are we calling this the Dharma? So this is a question, and the nature of this. So in the case of Ramayana, if I contrast it back, here is a king, there are two different kings. There is no natural battle there. Here there is a natural battle. We see it every day. Battle in the family, in cousins, over succession, over property. This history has told us this story innumerable times.
Mm-hmm.
So but when history tells it, it does not tell us that this was a dharma. It tells us this was about greed, this was ambition, this was two people
Mm-hmm.
fighting it for out because they felt this was their right.
Mm-hmm.
History does not term it as a dharma.
Mm-hmm.
So this definition, this term seems to
Mm-hmm.
be, at least seemed to be out of place. Then why are we calling it a dharma? Or is there something
Mm-hmm.
different that at least I am not able to appreciate? Is there more than what meets the eye?
You are basically saying a mere battle between good versus evil would not probably be called dharma yuddha.
This is not even a battle between good and evil. It's really not cast as
Uh-huh.
a battle between the a good and evil in Ramayana is in some sense a dharma. So that's again a battle of good and evil, and in some sense we don't use the word dharma there, but it's cast as that. This is not even
Mm-hmm.
cast as a battle between good and evil, because on the other
Mm-hmm.
side there is Bhishma Pitama, there is Dronacharya, who are fighting. Now they really can't fight on the side of evil. So it's not even
Mm-hmm.
cast as a battle between good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
In the
Mm-hmm.
case of
Interesting.
Ramayana, if you look at it, the righteous guy Vibhishan did not fight on the side of Ravan.
Mm-hmm.
All the
Mm-hmm.
warriors on the side of Ravan were kind of seen to be, in some sense, supporting Ravan and in some sense being evil in that niche. And
Mm-hmm.
there is that easier construct that they are Rakshasas and hence they are evil.
Mm-hmm.
That simplistic binary does not exist here.
Does not exist here. Yes, we have many people, and Mahabharat vouches for the righteousness of many people who fought on the side of Kauravas.
That's the first part of it. The second part of it, even let's look at how Krishna joined the battle. So there is this tale of that
Mm-hmm.
Arjun goes to ask for Krishna's help, and Duryodhan also comes for that. And
Mm-hmm.
Krishna says that he will, on one side it is him who will fight, and he will not take up a weapon, and on the other side his entire army will fight. Now, even this distinction or this separation of Krishna and his army. Now, Krishna's army
Mm-hmm.
can't fight for evil.
Can't
Doesn't
fight
make
for evil.
sense. It really does not make
Mm-hmm.
sense. So
Mm-hmm.
it does not appear on the face of it as a battle between good and evil.
Aha. Mm-hmm.
It does
Makes
not
sense.
appear to be that. Then what is happening here?
Mm-hmm.
Why it
Mm-hmm.
appears to be more, and the tone also always is about succession. is about the correct succession. That's the
Mm-hmm.
tone that even a lot of times, even when Krishna is telling them that no, you should go and fight, it is about that this is your right and you should fight for it.
Mm-hmm.
The question is not like Krishna killed Kans because Kans was evil. That's the battle between a good and an evil.
Mm-hmm.
Krishna's argument to fight is
Mm-hmm.
not that Duryodhan is evil and he should be exterminated. It is that you need to fight for your right.
Mm-hmm.
There's a different construct here.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm?
Even the Jarasandh incident is more clear in terms of the good evil binary. Jarasandh is evil, so he needs to be killed. And there is this Rakshas connection with Jarasandh.
There is this Rakshas correction, which are like simple motives used to probably simplify the story or make you use some poetic licenses there. But so the
Mm-hmm.
question of when this is called as the dharma, and this is the great battle in Indian epics. It
Mm-hmm.
why are we terming it as a dharma? And in some sense, in popular perception, maybe right, maybe wrong, dharma is connoted with the religion.
Dharma is connoted with religion.
So what has religion to do with the battle of succession? Or
Mm-hmm.
what does Hindu dharma have to do with a battle of succession? So this is the kind of the
Mm-hmm.
construct, the question that kind of always intrigued me, and it didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Second, let's look at some of the history of or the genesis of the story in the Mahabharata. It starts with the
Mm-hmm.
story of Shantanu.
Mm-hmm. At
Shantanu
least the
marrying.
BR at least the B.R. Chopra Mahabharat did start with the story of Shantanu.
Even the original Ved Vyas one, there is reference to Bharat and all that, but the real story of Hastinapur starts from this generation. The
From
core
Shantanu.
generation under
Yes.
focus comes from Shantanu. So
Mm-hmm.
there is this clan, the Kurus, who have been ruling it for long, and there are multiple stories that go about it, the Yadu and the Purus, and then the story of Bharat. But the generation we are talking about, the story starts with Shantanu.
Starts with Shantanu. Yes.
And Shantanu marrying Ganga, and the
Satyavati.
first seven
Then
sons being
yeah.
uh, what should I say, being
Drowned. Killed.
drowned in the drowned in the Ganga, and the eighth one, which is Devrat.
Devvrat. Yes.
Shantanu intervenes and says, "No, no, you should not drown it."
Mm-hmm.
That's the start of it, and then Ganga
Mm-hmm.
disappears. The more important thing starts coming in when Shantanu falls in love with Satyavati, the fisherwoman, and when uh, Shantanu asks for Satyavati's hand from her father. He says that Satyavati's sons should be the king. Now, typically at that time, the rule of succession said that the eldest son should be king. So by
Should be
that
king.
right, it was Devrat's right to be king.
It was
So
Devvrat's right.
Shantanu
Yes.
refuses. So again,
Mm-hmm.
there is this interesting passage wherein Shantanu, although he's smitten, refuses. He turns down the offer and he says, I cannot accept it. Next,
Mm-hmm.
Devrat learns about it and he sees that his father is not happy. He goes to
The
Satyavati's father and says,
Fisher
okay,
King. Yeah.
to the Fisher King and says, okay, I accept your condition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Satyavati's sons will be king.
Kings.
At this moment, the Fisher King, Satyavati's father, makes a very interesting remark. He says, not only
Mm-hmm.
will your sons not be king, if you marry and have sons, then there will be they will challenge Satyavati's sons and their progenies in future.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in some sense it's like he's a clairvoyant who's in a nutshell telling us what will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And
Some kind of a foreshadowing happening in the entire
it's a foreshadow
story of
or
Mahabharata, the
basically it,
subsequent story. Yeah.
so and he asks Devrat to take a vow that he will never marry, he will never father a son. so that that problem gets resolved.
Mm-hmm.
Devrat agrees, and which is why he takes this Bhishma Pratigya and his name changes to Bhishma. So this is the first construct wherein we are seeing a question of succession being raised and Satyavati's father putting that construct in play, and we see that. Next, as time continues, Satyavati's sons, there are two sons, Vichitravirya and Chitrangada. Chitrangada dies, then Vichitravirya dies, and even for Vichitravirya, there is the story of Amba Ambika Ambalika. He marries two of them, the third is spurned, and there are the issues which we can park. And he also dies. So now the kingdom is left without a heir. So the king has died without a heir. Satyavati asks Bhishma to become the king, which he refuses because he had taken the vow. So should we continue, Prashant? I think there are some issues at Prashant's end, so just let's wait for a minute for Prashant to join back.
Okay, I had again pushed off internet acting up. So I've switched the internet connection. Hopefully, it should work better. Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay. So,
Yeah.
so I think we were where. So I was talking about the part wherein Shantanu has died. Satyavati's son Chitrangad becomes the king. He also dies, and then the younger
Okay.
one Vichitravirya, he's married to Amba and Ambika, and Ambalika. We have that issue with Bhishma,
Mm-hmm.
which is really a
Mm-hmm.
side story, so not important. And the important
Mm-hmm.
thing is that the younger son Vichitravirya dies also without a heir.
Mm-hmm.
So now the kingdom does not have a heir.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, Shantanu Satyavati asks Bhishma to become the king,
Mm-hmm.
and he refuses because he had taken the vow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, in this context, a very interesting thing happens. We are told that Satyavati had a son, the
Mm-hmm.
great sage Ved Vyas, from
Mm-hmm.
a earlier relationship with
Rendezvous.
a sage, rendezvous with a
Mm-hmm.
sage. So interesting. Again, at this point in time, Ved Vyas
Mm-hmm.
is not asked to be king.
Mm-hmm.
There is no heir. There is no
Mm-hmm.
successor to the king.
Mm-hmm.
Devrat is being asked. Bhishma has been asked. He refuses.
Mm-hmm.
Ved Vyas is
Mm-hmm.
not considered. So they are in some sense telling us something about how succession should work. So although Ved Vyas is Satyavati's son,
Mm-hmm.
he is not Shantanu's son.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
Shantanu is not shown to be aware of Ved Vyas.
You think that is significant?
If he was there and had he accepted it, it might would have triggered us different things, as we would see in later cases of Kunti and Pandu.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It could have triggered different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
They're silent here, maybe because that it's probably not important. Also, maybe it was not important. But
Or
what is
maybe
very important?
Or maybe a similar thing happens in a later generation, which sort of sets up. So maybe they are just showing the contrast that if the dad does not accept a son who's fathered by another father, then there is no problem in succession. But if the dad accepts that kid as his own son, then he becomes a claimant.
So in some sense, the Mahabharat clearly steps out that when should matlab, there are these very interesting terms used. When should a husband accept another son from his wife? And they tell us, okay, in these conditions you should accept that. In these conditions they are not.
You
In which
mean another man's son as his own,
as his own, although the mother being the wife.
mother being the wife.
And here the question of acceptance that they talk about is not how we look at acceptance today. It is more in terms of, is he a heir or is he not a heir?
Mm-hmm.
The question, when the Mahabharata talks about it, the important question is here. The question is not whether he should live in the house, should he get love and affection the way we look at it today. The question they
Mm-hmm.
always kind of
Is he
seemingly
a
talk about is
legitimate
the
claimant to the throne or not?
or
That
not.
is the question.
That is the question. In
Mm-hmm.
modern context, when we look at it, we look at it more as an emotional context
Mm-hmm.
of legitimacy and emotional, and will he get the father's name
Mm-hmm.
and those kind of issues.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
he a Jon
Whether his
Snow or is he not a Jon Snow kind of a thing
what name goes in his Aadhaar card.
in his Radha.
Yeah.
So that's the context. And at this point in time,
Mm-hmm.
it's Ved Vyas who is asked to come in and father sons through the princesses,
Mm-hmm.
Vichitra Virya's
Mm-hmm.
uh, widows, and he comes in and fathers them. Here
Mm-hmm.
again, there is a very interesting construct. The two
Mm-hmm.
princesses and one
Mm-hmm.
of their maids. So Vedvya's father's three sons:
Mm-hmm.
Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidur. Vidur being the son from the maid, Dhritarashtra being the
Mm-hmm.
elder son, but he's blind.
Mm-hmm.
And there is
Mm-hmm.
this very interesting device used because she closed her eyes. He's blind because she turned pale. That is why Pandu is weak and or pale. And in the case of Vidur, we don't get any such issues. So Vidur is ill and
Mm-hmm.
hearty. As these kids start to grow up, it is
Mm-hmm.
Dhritarashtra who is not put on the throne because he's blind. Pandu, a
Lokesh,
son
one
from Dashrath.
question. One question I have here. Is Vedvyas fathering these sons? Is that relevant? Because Vedvyas himself has no legitimacy as a claimant to the throne. He is not a claimant to the throne. The claim of Dhritarashtra or Pandu comes from the fact that they are sons of the widows of the king. Right. So instead
Yeah.
of Vedvyas, had there been any other man, would the claim be similar or would there have been a difference?
So this is an interesting question. Why has Ved Vyas been used here? So if you look at it from a construct, one, this could be
Mm-hmm.
itihas. This is what happened. If you just
Uh-huh.
look at it from a construct perspective, there are two interesting angles that Ved Vyas throws up here. One,
Mm-hmm.
this gives more. This highlights that figure of Ved Vyas being Satyavati's son, and
Mm-hmm.
it throws up the issue that although he was Satyavati's son, he was not a claimant to the throne. So it's made crystal clear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
So you're
although no
saying,
other son, so in a condition
uh-huh.
with no other son of either the king or the queen, king is surviving, the queen's
Mm-hmm.
son did
Mm-hmm.
not become a claimant to the throne. We are being told very clearly.
So you're saying the significance of Vedvyas coming and fathering those kids is essentially to demonstrate that the queen's son from a previous relationship does not have a claim, even if there are no legit sons available in the
Absolutely.
royal
Even if
family.
there are no legit sons available.
And we are also saying that the claim of Dhritarashtra and Pandu does not derive any strength from them being Vedvyas's son. Or in other words, had their father been somebody other than Vedvyas, their claim would have been equally strong. As we see, in
So
fact, in the case of Pandavas.
So we see that in the case of Pandavas, and there are these stories. So when Satyavati and Bhishma are having this discussion of about what to do, and Mahabharata has these all these anecdotal stories being told about at that point in time. So they narrate
Mhm.
tales of a couple of such earlier instances wherein Brahmins had been used to father sons for the
Okay.
Kshatriyas, and they then became the inheritors and the heirs and the kings. So that's the context given to it. So this is being told as a legitimate, and this is being told as not something that's happening for the first time. This has happened in today's language. We would say it has precedence and it has
Uh-huh.
legitimacy. This construct.
So
So the
basically
Mahabharata at
we.
most of the
Uh,
time uses this precedence angle, which is told through anecdotes, stories that
uh-huh.
somebody would narrate to the other. Very very similar
Uh-huh.
to the legal precedence framework that we have today.
I find this quite interesting that the significance of dad in the Niyog method is essentially as a sperm donor. The legitimacy of the kids, the claim to the throne does not come from the bloodline of the dad.
It does and it does not. So in some cases it does, in some cases it does not, and these distinctions are being made clear. So in this case, Ved Vyas is just, if you can call it in that fashion, the legitimacy comes from the construct and the
Mm-hmm.
situation. In this situation, this construct has been used, and it is the right, it is the dharma to do it. In some sense, the word dharma
Mm-hmm.
is used again. It's your
Mm-hmm.
duty, it's your dharma to do it. So even the
Mm-hmm.
queens, the widows of Vichitravirya are told that this is your duty, you should do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to father sons, the kingdom needs a heir.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the construct again told. So again here there is, so we've seen the issue of Vedvyas, which has been highlighted. Another issue that is being highlighted here is now Vedvyas is the father of the king,
Mm-hmm.
but Vidur is not considered to be a
Mm-hmm.
claimant to the throne.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it appears that this could be a device.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That why does Vidur, why does Vedvyas father three sons?
Mm-hmm.
It tells us that although Vedvyas is the father of all the three sons and Vidur is the healthiest of these guys, and we see it back when Pandu dies and Dhritarashtra is crowned back again. So somebody who had been sidestepped is crowned. So it's made amply clear that Vidur is never a claimant to the throne. So although
Mm-hmm.
they share the same father. So this
Mm-hmm.
distinction is also made very, very clear.
So again, which basically says that the strength of the claim does not come from the father, at least in this case.
That's a part of it. The other thing when you start thinking about these things is, are they trying to send a message? Is there something more that meets the eye? Are with these kind of constructs,
Mm-hmm.
and the more you start thinking about them, it seems that would this just be coincidences? Too many coincidences happening.
Mm-hmm.
Satyavati having a son Vedvyas, Vichitravirya dying without them, all the Devra taking this
Mm-hmm.
Bhishma Pratigya, no other
Mm-hmm.
son, all the other sons of Ganga have been drowned.
Mm-hmm.
The eldest son Dhritarashtra, then Pandu, then Vidur. Vidur happening, but we don't. He does not get the key. There seems to be a construct. At least I would imagine there seems to be some construct at play. They're trying to tell us something. Now, if we make
Mm-hmm.
that assumption, so we can say, let's make that assumption.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm? Then they are probably telling us that in such a scenario, this is the right way of succession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So proceeding further, Pandu becomes the king, and again Pandu has two wives, Kunti and Madri, and then there is a backstory to Kunti which we'll come back to later. Dhritarashtra marries Gandhari, and Pandu becomes king and he rules for a while, and then the incident happens, which we all know, that he goes and kills a sage, and he's told that whenever he's trying to have sex, he'll die. So he leaves the kingdom, he goes into the forest with both his wives, And now in this construct, what happens? Like we talked about, Dhritarashtra becomes the king. Vidur is always the minister. He is not even considered as a king. So although
Mm-hmm.
Dhritarashtra is blind, he becomes the king. And the Mahabharata tells us that now there is a kind of a race that starts. Who will father
Mm-hmm.
the son the fastest? Will it be Gandhari and Dhritarashtra,
Mm-hmm.
or will it be Pandu, Kunti, Madri?
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
message goes out.
Mm-hmm.
The Ved Vyas Mahabharata also tells us at this point in time, seemingly it is Gandhari who conceives first,
Okay.
but there is this very very peculiar description of how 100 sons happened, that those king it became a lump, and she cut
Mm-hmm.
out that lump and then put it in a pot, and that grew to 100 pots, which took a lot of while for Duryodhan and his 100 brothers
Mm-hmm.
to take birth. There is this tale which at least I have never understood what that means to signify. Parallelly, at the same time, in the forest, there is Pandu, and
Mm-hmm.
Pandu now cannot father a son because of that curse. So there is a problem which
Mm-hmm.
is being told. So again, another angle being thrown in. So Pandu cannot now
Mm-hmm.
father a son because of that curse. So what should happen now? But he
Mm-hmm.
wants to have a heir. So at this point in time, Kunti tells Pandu about her boon, that she can invoke any of the gods and they will come and father a son. She tells him about the boon, but she does not tell him about Karna when she invoked the Surya god,
Mm-hmm.
the sun god. Kunti has three sons: Yudhishthir, uh, Bhim, Arjun, and then Madri has the twins,
Same
Nakul
Arjun.
and Sahdev. Here also
Mm-hmm.
calling them children of gods or devas could be just a device being used to say that some influential people or some good people were used to father those sons, and it could just be a device. And instead of trying to name them and getting into those issues like we saw in the case of Vedvyas, when it was called out who the father was, here it said
Mm-hmm.
these are sons from these devas.
Sons of the
Although
gods.
a
Yeah.
lot of modern interpretations try to link Yudhishthir with Vidur, we know that a lot of modern interpretations and a lot of people think that maybe Vidur is Yudhishthir's father, and both of them go back to the god of death, Yam, and they have been shown to have a lot of, they think similarly, they have a lot of common attributes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But here the Mahabharata uses probably again we can assume that there could be a device being used here.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point in time, this issue becomes that Yudhishthir coincidentally is elder to Duryodhana.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who should be the
King.
next king after Dhritarashtra?
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
is the issue. If Dhritarashtra is in the is the king, is it the king's eldest son, or is Dhritarashtra, because he's ruling in lieu of Pandu, it is Pandu's eldest son, or is it the eldest prince?
Mm-hmm.
So Yudhishthir is the eldest Pandav,
Mm-hmm.
Duryodhan is the eldest Kaurav, but between them, Yudhishthir is elder.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the question that is at the heart of the Mahabharata. And
Mm-hmm.
the fact is, this question is invoked time and again, even before the rivalry takes those shapes, and it's talked about in the stones.
Mm-hmm.
The one message that it is giving us when it's talking about these stones is it's telling us that the whole population is kind of sensing that there is something going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's in some
Mm-hmm.
sense like foreboding of what will go to happen, what will happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And with a period of time, Yudhishthira is shown to be more liked by the people, and Duryodhana is started to get negated, which is probably more like a setup to the final war.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases, the Mahabharata does not talk about common people or governance. It virtually does not have any incidents talking about it. Very, very few, if any.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
You
so
are
the
saying that nowhere are we comparing Yudhishthir and Duryodhan in terms of their capability to govern.
or
Is that you are saying?
governance, or we're not even talking about common people. So, to a fair degree, common people are like the chorus or the extras in a
Uh-huh.
movie.
Mm-hmm.
They're not key characters.
Mm-hmm.
Governance is not a key character. So another
Mm-hmm.
thing that the Mahabharata seemingly is very, very silent on, and to a fair degree,
Mm-hmm.
even the Ramayana is silent on, is about
Mm-hmm.
governance. Today, when we think about monarchical systems and we think about governance,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the Mahabharata, there hardly seems to be anything about governance being talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And between a Yudhishthir and a Duryodhan, it is more of these stories, the Varnavat incident, this incident, the incident, wherein which is in some sense shaping public opinion. It is not their deeds
Mm-hmm.
as administrators or this that is shaping it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you are saying that we say that Duryodhan is bad because he did Varnavat and he did the Dyut Krida, and not because he was the governor of say a couple of districts and he did not do well there,
Or he
whereas
was
Yudhishthir
evil
and
there, and he used to flog the people, and he used to do this.
mm-hmm.
There's no mention about these kind of stuff in the Mahabharata.
Mm-hmm. We are not even
And
talking about how they are with common people.
common people don't really exist in except as chorus.
Uh-huh.
This is so if you read the Mahabharata, this is a very interesting field. Today, when we think about governance and when we think about the systems, we think about common people and their role.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we go back and try and look back at what we saw in the B.R. Chopra's Mahabharata, you don't see common people at all.
We don't see common people there.
So this is again a very, very interesting thing. Today, when we think about
In
governance, we
fact,
think that
Lokesh, I'll make a distinction here. In Ramayana, at least in Tulsidasa's Ramayana, Ramcharitmanas, and in Ramanand Sagar's serial that we saw. I mean, the people of Ayodhya talk about Ram, and there is some kind of a connection or affection between amongst people of Ayodhya towards Ram, which is shown. I don't know if that is the case in Valmiki Ramayana, but Ramcharitmanas clearly shows that. In
there
Mahabharata,
is
we don't see
affection
any
shown.
such thing.
No, so we see that kind of an affection, but again, if you look at the affection shown towards Ram, it's not about governance, or it's just about, yeah, he's the eldest son. It's like we talking about film stars.
Uh huh.
So when we talk about
Okay.
film stars, or so it's star worship in some sense, and in this case, if it's Lord Ram, it's that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. So
So
governance
even in
is not an issue there.
Valmiki's Ramayana, the chorus talks about it, but it's more like
Okay.
chorus.
Mm-hmm.
They go to the forest. They accompany that. When Ram is being exiled, they feel bad. But I think these are more like popular sentiments that we can imagine. It's like a hero, and the king's son and the eldest son is one of the most prominent figures. Everybody knows that person, at least by name.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of
Mm-hmm.
the most talked about things. So if you think about politics today, the most talked about thing in Ayodhya at that point in time would be after Dashrath, when will Ram become the king? And such as the incident happens. So you
I
need to
think
put it in
I
that context.
I think the biggest proof that governance was not an issue in those days or in that context is probably the fact that when a new king is made, there is no attempt to test his suitability for governing the entire kingdom by, say, for example, giving him some smaller area to govern, or there is no test or no assessment of his ability to govern. By his legitimacy in that succession ladder, he's made a king. So obviously, till at least the medieval times, we can say that governance or the ability to govern probably was not a criteria in deciding the king.
I would restrict myself to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata right now.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And in this construct, and because these are fairly long epics, and they,
Uh-huh.
when they go into details, they go into details.
Uh-huh.
So given that construct, it's not that they are short and the authors would have problem. It seems to be a conscious choice.
Not talk about
and
governance.
and the conscious choice in the sense that it probably does not matter, so governance is not an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So the bigger issue, and this goes back to a discussion we had earlier, that the structure and the stability of the structure is more important. The question of governance is not the core question.
Mm-hmm.
That's the message being
Mm-hmm.
sent out.
Mm-hmm.
That was in fact one of my first disconnects that happened when I started reading them.
Mm-hmm.
That today when we look at governance, when we look at these structures, we look at governance. That's the most important thing we talk about. And here,
Mm-hmm.
these epics, and these are magnificent epics, and they just don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
They completely, in a sense, imagine there is a void there
Mm-hmm.
when we look at it from
Mm-hmm.
today's context, with today's eyes. When I read it or you read it, we come in with the kind of context of today, the way we think about things today.
Lokesh, one way to look at it could be that in those times, and those are the times, I mean, obviously, when we look at it from today's context, so government is there in almost every part of our lives, getting school admissions, getting vaccine shots, getting a vehicle registration, getting the ability to drive on roads, the ability to get a gas connection, the ability to get an electricity connection, bank account. Every aspect of life there is government in the today's context. We are talking about thousands of years ago, and we are talking about a time when religion was very strong. So a lot of social support probably came through dharamshalas and the religious philanthropy. And perhaps the role of government was just very minuscule, just to provide safety security to the people, and rest of it they managed by themselves. Perhaps the intrusion of government in local citizens' life was significantly less than we have it today.
I would agree and disagree with what you said.
Uh huh.
So maybe the role of the government has increased, but the
Uh
other
huh.
way to look at it is that the king,
Uh huh.
the kind of importance that the king has been given in both these epics,
Uh huh.
is far
Uh huh.
greater than what governments are given today. So there is this other contrast at play. So in some sense, what they're saying is that the king is extremely important. That's a core message being sent out.
Uh huh. So you're saying the is not totally irrelevant.
Not only not totally irrelevant, he's critical. He's super critical.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other message be going on. So you might be right when you're trying to interpret it that way, but you need to probably put it together with this side of the coin also. That the king is, at least the message from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata is that the king is super important. We are building epics around it. So that's largely the construct we're looking at. I think some network issue at Prashant's end. Let's just wait for him to come back.
Sorry, Lokesh, my internet seems to be acting up too much.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yes, it's
So we
still
were
there.
on this at this point. So the king, and what the king does is not that important. The king is important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other way we can, at least from the Mahabharata, we can interpret is that king
Mm-hmm.
and having stability of king is very important, and the king
Mm-hmm.
not being evil in the sense of the Jarasandh kind of issue, is the critical
Mm-hmm.
factor. That's the message
Mm-hmm.
being sent out.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer?
Okay.
Does that probably answer your question?
It does. It does. What we are saying is that yes, the government, the intrusion of government, so to say, is relatively less, but the king is indeed important. Uh, what king does at a microscopic level probably is not that important unless the king is of the evil variety like Jarasandh.
And
But
in which
if
case do you
that
have those are solutions, and which is why probably we have Krishna killing Kans and Bhim killing Jarasandh. You need to wipe that king
Mhm.
out. So we have those
a king has to
tales being told.
maintain, but if that is being done, the stability of structure is more important.
Yeah, that seems to be a message.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense.
So let's come back to we were with Pandu's sons and Dhritarashtra's sons.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm? So what we were talking about then was that there is this current, this undercurrent of who will be king. And I guess at
Mm-hmm.
that time, this would have always been an undercurrent, and this would always been probably the most important topic of gossip in those times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If it's not hard to imagine that this would be like the gossip in town, and
The
any
yeah.
delta thing happening out there would probably be magnified and would just move at the speed, unimaginable speeds.
Mm-hmm.
And people would
Mm-hmm.
take their own stances, their own sides, their own. They would add their own, make it a juicier conversation, and do that.
Mm-hmm.
So what the Mahabharata in some sense starts to say that these kids go back and live together, which is again something that we have seen enough times in history, wherein brothers who fight after in succession actually grew up together. So the same construct is here.
Mm-hmm. The 105 kids, 105 kids live together.
They all live together. They are under the same guru. They are living in the same
Mm-hmm.
palace. There is rivalry between them. You might even call it there is some kind of enmity between them. And the
Mm-hmm.
kind that is shown, actually we have a couple of incidents where they try and take over Bhim is the target because he's probably the strongest of them all, but
Mm-hmm.
the Mahabharata just kind of hints at them and moves ahead. So it's probably more of creating a kind of thing that there is rivalry,
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
kiddish, childish rivalry, which can be expected. And
Mm-hmm.
even at that time there is this question in everybody's mind that who will be king.
Mm-hmm.
So another important probably message being thrown is that this question is a pertinent question.
Mm-hmm.
This question exists. This question is not very clear.
Mm-hmm. Makes
Who
sense.
will be
Makes
king is a
absolute sense.
question that is there in everybody's mind. And with time, those rumors and those juices and everything, they are like moving from here to there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we move to the first major incident, which is Varnavat. Even before the Varnavat, we have that very small incident wherein there is this show of arms at the the princes showing their skills off in a arena, and there is this Karna challenging an Arjun,
Mm-hmm.
and the duel between Bhim and Duryodhan.
Makes sense.
So which is non-decisive, but Karna ends up challenging Arjun, and Duryodhan crowns Karna as the king of Anga.
King of the state Ang, yes.
So that he can take on this. And this distinction is also very clearly made that only a prince can fight a prince. A commoner can't fight a prince. This is a question being raised, which leads to Karna being crowned king of Anga.
Mm-hmm.
This context happens, and there is this other subtext to it, which is probably not relevant in this discussion of Dharmyuddha, as to why this was there, which we can probably discuss later. This triggers the issue that now Duryodhan thinks that the Pandavas need to be rid of because they are now strong enough here.
Mm-hmm.
They are strong in
Okay.
battle, and probably another incident that happens, that as Guru Dakshina, Duryodhana, Dronacharya asks for Panchal, and they go and defeat the Panchals. So this is again a very strange thing. The five Pandavas go and defeat the Panchals. That's what the
Mm-hmm.
tale tells us. And they
Mm-hmm.
make Drupad the prisoner, and Dronacharya splits the kingdom into two.
So you are implying that the battle between Pandavas and Panchals is also probably not a battle between two armies. It is just that five princes went there and challenged some warriors, champions of that army, and something like that. Something less than a full-fledged war between two armies. Is that what we are saying?
There seems to be something else here as a construct, although they don't spell it
Uh-huh.
out very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And in these kind of wars, there is no destruction being talked about. There is no death being talked about. So what's remarkable is that typically in the Mahabharata, before the Great War, we can
Mm-hmm.
actually count the number of people who have been killed, really killed,
Mm-hmm.
and they stand out. There is this Shishupal that
Mm-hmm.
Krishna killed. There is this Jarasandh that, and probably that's it.
Uh-huh.
So there is this. So if you just try and count the number of deaths before the Great War,
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's a very strange kind of a thing.
It's extremely surgical. The death. It's very very precise with very little collateral damage, so to say.
Or the other way to look at it, in most of the other, so they are like boxing matches. They are like duels, which
Mm-hmm.
end up being decided, but there is no loss of life.
Mm-hmm.
So there are these duels happen. So
Mm-hmm.
like you said in the case of Panchal, so the prince is going in, and some form of engagement happened, which was some form of military engagement happened, but
Mm-hmm.
it probably wasn't an engagement that led to deep
Mm-hmm.
destruction. They resolved it.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
There seems to be that text to it, and it is in this context we should go
Mm-hmm.
back and look at the Gita Updesh, because the Gita Updesh,
Uh-huh.
or the reticence of Arjun to fight, his reluctance, his
Uh-huh.
because he realizes this is a different battle. This is not a battle that he's gonna fight and okay, in the evening everybody will go back home,
And have a couple of drinks.
whatever be the case.
Yeah.
He
Uh-huh.
probably realizes that. So that's the other construct there.
Mm-hmm.
He realizes the gravity of the situation, that this is different,
Mm-hmm.
which probably is also one of the reasons that Krishna has to intervene and motivate and convince and Arjun.
Mm-hmm. So we are saying the despondency of Arjun right before Mahabharata is also an indication that this battle is fundamentally different from the battles that we have seen before. We have seen quite a few battles before the actual war of Mahabharata. We have seen Jarasandh issue. We have seen this thing with Panchals. We have seen the Ashwamedh Yagya journey
The
of
Rajsuya Yagya,
Yudhishthir.
that Rajsuya
Sorry, yeah,
is what.
Rajasuya Yagya,
And
this
in the
thing.
Rajsuya Yagya, it's a large description there, wherein about 50 or 30 or 40 battles are defined. That Arjun leads, goes north, Bhim goes south, Nakul goes this way, Sahadev goes this way, and these are the actions that are happening. So enough engagements
And
happening,
enough
but not
engagements happen.
really,
And
not no death really being talked about.
mhm.
No death. The
even when
deaths.
even when Bhim and Arjun go to the forest for their tapasya, they have this Hidimba incident with Bhim.
So
Then
they
there are a
stand out. So
couple
all the deaths here
incidents with,
stand
yeah.
out in the Mahabharata before the Great War. So you can call it
Mm-hmm.
the Hidimba or the Bakasur.
Mm-hmm.
So you or the Kichak.
The Kichak
So
thing and Virat.
and most of these come at the hands of Bhim. So Bhim is responsible for all
Uh-huh.
of them, including Jarasandh. In some sense,
Uh-huh.
if I take a step back and say maybe Arjun is not shown killing anybody before the Great War.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. That's also interesting. That's an interesting observation.
All these four are duels between Bhim and the other party.
Arjun went to some place in northeast. Uttara also married Arjun, right?
No,
And
Uttara did not marry Arjun. Uttara
there
married
was this.
Abhimanyu.
No, no, yes.
Arjun married Subhadra. He
Subhadra.
also
There was this.
married a lot of Chitrangada and the Ulupi kings and all that, the daughter of the
Aha.
Ulupi king. Wherein again there is this very interesting, I think so this is about Chitrangada, that the son, that Arjun's fathers, becomes the heir of that king, because the norm in that kingdom is that the daughter's king, because he does not have a son, will
Aha.
become the king. So
Mm-hmm.
after, and that context is very important again, because after the Mahabharat, none of the sons,
Mm-hmm.
Draupadi's sons are alive.
Mm-hmm.
None of Draupadi's sons are alive. None of the sons are
None
alive,
other
which
of
is
this one.
why Parikshit, who is
Aha.
actually Abhimanyu's son, is like kind of resuscitated by Krishna, and then he takes and he becomes. So the entire generation is wiped out. So why didn't
Mm-hmm.
Chitrangada's son become the king, or these kind of questions? So they have tried
Mm-hmm.
to answer that, all of them in the succession models.
Mm-hmm.
So stepping back, I guess, in a nutshell, what we are saying, and we should probably continue this discussion maybe tomorrow when we look at it, is that there
Mm-hmm.
are these very interesting constructs being given here.
Mm-hmm.
And two, three things are very clear, are probably being talked about here. One, common people and governance is not a question that really the Mahabharata lays
Mm-hmm.
any stress on. Too much stress on is also any stress on.
Mm-hmm.
Second, most of the battles or the engagements seem to be, if you can call it today, like boxing matches, or friendly duels. They have
Mm-hmm.
repercussions. They have
Mm-hmm.
implications.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, in some sense, they could be looked at as Olympics today.
Mm-hmm.
They have significant implications, but they are not bloody. They don't
Mm-hmm.
lead to destruction of life in most cases. And the difference being the Great War.
Aha.
And which is why the Great War can be looked at as a dharmic. Something changed. That
Mm-hmm.
here we used to fight. It wasn't that they never used to fight. They were Kshatriyas. They used to
Mm-hmm.
fight. But the rules would be different, which is why you can now also understand they used to fight under rules. Now, if I look at it as Olympics, obviously Olympics, a boxing match has rules, and you
Mm-hmm.
abide by them, and everybody abides by them, and so you can see that in this context. It is when we come to the Great War, the 18-day war, that something different has happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we have
Makes sense.
moved from these these Olympics to this mixed martial arts fight to the death kind of a model.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that's changed.
Aha.
So because we find it very hard to understand why are they fighting under these rules, why are they not fighting, why would you fight it when there is so much today. When we look at battles, we look at, it's a question of what are rules beyond a point, and we will not fight in the dark. You can exploit anything, and which happens in the Great War. In the Great War, a lot of these things are exploited.
These
Something has
rules are
changed.
violated. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Something has changed,
Mm-hmm.
which can also be seen in the reluctance of a Arjun.
Arjun's reluctance before the war.
So two very important things here. Third
Mm-hmm.
is the kind of the family and the succession stories they came to seem to be talking about. It seems to be a very strong undertone, or could be a key message here. Like we talked about Satyavati's father being a clairvoyant and saying about this. We
Mm-hmm.
look at the role of Ved Vyas. We can go to the earlier story about Dushyant and Shakuntala. That's again a very interesting story that we should talk about,
Mm-hmm.
and how that happened. We have this
Mm-hmm.
construct of a Karna and the five brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a lot of succession kind of questions being talked about, and it seems like the the Mahabharat is trying to give us a way to look at these questions, answer them. They're trying to
Mm-hmm.
explain something to us, and their core explanation seems to be of a different framework. Like we also talked about a fourth thing, and probably we should end, is that kingdoms don't change. The only two instances that at least I could pick up is when
Uh-huh.
Panchal is split into two, and
Mm-hmm.
finally Dronacharya pays with his life at the hands of Drishtadyumna for
Drashtadyumna.
splitting Panchal. The other is
Uh-huh.
the
So
split
you,
of Hastinapur.
uh-huh.
There are no kingdom changes really that happen.
That again is interesting. We are saying that battles happen, even kings die, but kingdoms, or rather the map of the world, does not change.
Does not
And
change.
map
And
map
the
of
way
the
the
world.
map changes is, or the way the alignment structure changes is through these Rajasuya Yagya and the Ashwamedh Yagya.
Uh-huh.
They build a
Mhm.
structure, they build a hierarchy.
And a very interesting thing that we see two incidents where the map, so to say, the political map has changed. One is the split of Hastinapur. The other one is this Panchal being split. And
And
both
at the
of
end
these
of the
incidents,
hmm,
both of these
at the end
incidents
of
have
it,
led to disaster.
not only led to disaster, at the end of the story, the map has been restored. So not only did they
Uh-huh.
lead to disasters, it's also very interesting that these are not permanent. At the end of it, the map has come back. Panchal is one,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Hastinapur is one.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, interesting. Mm-hmm. So should we stop here, Lokesh, today? We
Yeah, I
start
think so. We
from the
should
same.
stop here and pick up the
Let's
thread.
continue
So
this on Monday.
let's do that on Monday.
Yeah, let's give ourselves a respite on 2 days.
Let's do that. Chalo. See you.
चलिए ठीक है. Thanks everyone. Thanks Lokesh. Nice, great discussion. Been fun. Good night, Lokesh. Good night,
Good
everyone.
night. Good night, all.